Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Ring and Verse, a queer reading of Final Fantasy XV episode Ignis. I'm your presenter, Schalakitty. If you were here for my panel during Undefined Behavior on the queer themes of Final Fantasy VII, then I hope you are ready for more of the same, but this time about Final Fantasy XV. And I admit that in putting this panel together, it has kind of morphed into my heart cannot contain how much I care about Ignis Scientia, a 2-hour-long scream by Schalakitty. But I really hope that y'all will enjoy my panel. I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite games and one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. A little bit about me as we're kind of getting to start. Also, let's get ourselves some cute Chocobo music. So hi, I am Schalakitty, she, her pronouns please. Like I said before, I did a panel about this in this similar vein for FF7. Somehow I am lucky enough to come back and do one again for Final Fantasy XV. I was deeply involved in the Final Fantasy XV fandom from about 2015 until early 2018, and I have many feelings and many opinions. Also, yeah, that's a shot of me with the main cast, left to right, Ignis, Adam Crosdell, Gladio, Chris Parson, Noctis, Ray Chase, Prompto, Robbie Damon, all in full cosplay, along with the English language dub director, Keith Varley, and a flag that I made myself as part of a charity project. So let's talk a little bit about what we are covering. So this is a queer reading of Ignis' role in the Final Fantasy XV universe with a special focus on his DLC episode Ignis. So first part is going to be called Preludes. We're going to be establishing Ignis as a character, defining his role in the story, and have a discussion about his character arc. Then we have verse 1, that's an overview and discussion about the primary episode Ignis storyline. Verse 2, which is going to be an overview and discussion of the alternate verse episode Ignis storyline. And then Coda, which is a little wrap-up of some of my main points, and if we have time for it, Q&A. Also, right up front, spoiler warning! This panel will spoil you for Final Fantasy XV if you have never experienced it. I'm going to be talking about specific plot points, sometimes in pretty deep detail, so this is your warning right here at the start. If you have never experienced Final Fantasy XV and do not want me to completely spoil this game for you, bow out now. Come back to this panel at a later time. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you have never experienced FF15 and you're here for the panel anyway, well, okay, come on in, welcome. This is the world of Final Fantasy XV. It's been about 4 years since this game released as of last week, and none of us are really over it yet. And if you are a fellow fan of Final Fantasy XV, come on, pull up a chair. It's time for our time-honored tradition of getting really emotional and crying around campfires. And at the end of the panel, we will have a Q&A session with that in mind. So please hold your questions until we reach the Q&A. I'm going to try very hard to make time to actually do the Q&A. But I might have to drop it for time, and if so, I do apologize. But if we do have time for Q&A, please use the Ask a Question channel points reward so I can clearly see your question. Thank you in advance for being really patient and understanding, though, if I do have to cut it for time. And do know that I will only sort of be vaguely watching chat. I have to stay on task, on schedule, to make sure that we actually kind of cover everything we need to in the time allotted. So here's what we can cover in this panel. We're going to talk a little bit about what constitutes the FF15 universe. So obviously we're going to be talking a lot about the main game, including the Royal Edition and the DLC. This includes main episodes and smaller events alike. While this panel is basically about episode Ignis, we are going to have to talk a lot about the main game in order to have a proper background for the story when we get to the DLC. We're going to be talking about the anime series Brotherhood. We're going to be doing a complete plot summary of Ignis' episode. We will vaguely reference the movie Kingsglaive. It's not really covered here, just because the main characters of the game are not really in the movie, but I'm just mentioning here for the sake of completeness. We will be listening to a track from the drama CD, Parting Ways. I will probably make some references to the novel, which is Dawn of the Future. I will mention some crossovers with other games. And also, I'll be referencing some developer panels, talks, and interviews. Now, just so people know, for the sake of this panel, we're going to be focusing on the English localized version for a variety of reasons. One, ease of accessibility for our English-speaking audience. Number two, though, there are specific translations and word choices in the English version, especially in episode Ignis, that very lend themselves to queer reading and add queer subtext to the story. And we're going to be talking about those choices in detail when we get to them. But I do want to point out that we're actually talking about a script that was localized by a queer person, since that might be something that's not really readily apparent to a lot of people. Matt Furta, who headed up the DLC localization for FF15, is openly queer. And while there's always going to be a personal-professional separation in these sorts of situations, the presence of a queer person in such a place of influence over the final project cannot really be ignored either. But we're still going to read the work as we would any other, but I just want to take a moment to point that out before we continue. And if need be, we will reference the Japanese version of things, and we will be listening to one scene in Japanese, as there's no equivalent English dub scene. And not listed here. Also, I just legitimately adore the English version. It's my favorite version, so that's the other reason. The secret reason. We're going to be watching and listening to a number of clips during the... There we go. Clips... We're going to be watching a number of clips during the panel. They are never more than 5 minutes long. A couple of the really long ones I will talk over when there's like quiet sections where I can talk over them. Clips will be played at full screen if possible, but any clip that requires content warnings will have that warning present above the clip. Otherwise, we are going to basically be using summaries. I will be summarizing plot points that we don't directly watch. I have chosen also to reference but not show certain scenes that, while part of the plot, might be very uncomfortable to watch. Because there are some pretty emotional and intense scenes as part of the panel. I'm going to also give you all our content warnings. And I'll give it to you all in a format that I'm sure some of you will recognize. But let's actually discuss all the notes and warnings here so that way people are aware before we get into the discussion proper. Big one up front, major character death. We are going to be discussing the deaths of several characters in FF15, and there also is an additional warning for on-screen character death because we will be watching a game over death scene to be able to analyze its content. Sort of related to this, we are also going to be referencing the death of a dog. And while we won't show any of this directly, there are going to be references to stabbings, both fatal and non-fatal. There also will be the on-screen threat of a stabbing, but it's stopped before that can happen. There's also going to be some depictions of heavy scarring, both realistic and magical, that can be a little hard for some people. Then we also do have some more fantastic types of imagery. There is mild body horror. This is mainly for our villain Arden, who, when in his demonic form, has like black ichor running over him, and the color of his eyes are inverted. There's a lot of fire imagery in episode Ignis, and a lot of painful magical rites. The most painful scenes, though, I will not show beyond screenshots, but there are some of the clips that will show this imagery in full. And probably the most common tag we're going to see, which is canon typical violence. FF15 is a game that blends realism and magic and features a good deal of bloodless violence. If it's not going to add anything to what I'm discussing, I'm going to be skipping over the boss fights. But there still will be scenes that have violence in them. And then these last two are not really warnings per se, they're more just sort of heads up. We are going to be talking a lot about canon disabled characters in FF15, how they're treated within the story, as well as how their disabilities are depicted within the gameplay, and a really good portion that is going to be discussing the initial struggle of adapting to a disability. Also, this is more just like a heads up. Certain clips contain a lot of screaming. There's actually a lot of screaming in these clips, so I'm just letting everyone know. And again, I'll try to do the clips at full screen so y'all can read the subtitles nice and clear, but there will be warning banners when needed. And finally, before we actually get into everything, all of this is my own interpretation, though, because, like, see, I'm just a fan who enjoys fan theories, literary analysis, and queer readings. Other folks can absolutely have their own interpretations and their own ways of viewing the work, and that's part and parcel with these types of discussions. I do want to give a very special shout-out, though, to Wicked Orin, who they are my partner, they are my editor, and they were my sounding board for this project, and they made so many contributions, both big and small. They helped me from the initial outline phase all the way through providing me with screenshots, helping me refine my theories and ideas, doing line editing for me, and also coming up with some of the best jokes. And anyway, you know what? FF15 is so ripe for queer readings, I absolutely could make arguments for pretty much any of the 4 main characters. So please enjoy the alternate timeline versions of this panel. Ever at your side, Prompto Argentum is queer, and you cannot change my mind. The Ultimate Flavor Experience, Gladiolus is bi, and do not bother arguing with me. Thank you, Orin, for that one. And push X to hug. Square Enix has abandoned this game to the fans. Can someone please make a dedicated hug button mod for the PC version? I feel like everyone in this game just needs more hugs. Anyway, let us actually get into the main meat of the panel. So this is our prelude, which is called Two Arcs Entwined. And this is an overview of Ignis as his character and his role in the main FF15 timeline. Also, I really like how this little image came up. So before we talk about the game, we're going to be talking about Ignis and establishing him as a character. Let's do a very basic baseline for our best boy, Iggy. So here's his biography. Ignis is a member of House Scientia, a family of royal retainers in service to the monarchy of Lucis. Ignis was chosen at age 6 to be the advisor to the young crown prince Noctis. He received an intensive Ivy League class education to prepare him for the role. Additionally, he chose to train himself physically to officially serve as a member of the Crown's Guard. These are specially trained officers who protect Insomnia and the royal family. During the game itself, he serves as the caretaker of the group, as both the designated driver and the camp cook. But let's dig in a little deeper and talk about Ignis as a fully fleshed out character. Now, character design for Final Fantasy XV uses a technique of stereotype or archetype plus 2 keywords to help round out the characters. This is how character experience son, Prosser V. Veracon, hopefully I got that right, refers to the technique. Fellow FF15 character experience designer Marie Iwanaga uses the term 3-keyword charm to explain it, but it's basically the same concept. Generally, the archetype keyword should cover your first impression and the majority of the characterization. Then we have 1 keyword that adds an additional layer of flavor, and then we have a final keyword that is reserved for the deeper or hidden aspect of the character. To illustrate, here is the official way the system works for Prompto. His 3 keywords are mood maker, that's someone who likes to lift other people's spirits, geek/otaku, and then he's concealing and sentimental. And then each of these main keywords breaks down further and is also contrasted with a list of wrong keywords. These are assumptions that might be made based off of any of these impressions that actually are untrue. Now, unfortunately, only Noctis and Prompto's official keyword sets have ever been publicly shared, and Prompto's is the only one that's ever been translated into English. But I'm not going to let that stop me. I ventured my best guess as to Ignis's keywords based off of interviews with episode Ignis's director, Takafumi Terada, and then I tried to basically make my own version of this chart. Here's my best guess, and I made sure to include both strengths and flaws for each one of these keywords. Look at it, it looks so nice and professional. So keyword number 1, tactician. Ignis has a sharp wit, he's a quick thinker, highly knowledgeable, well-educated, well-spoken, Ivy League, well-put-together, posh, detail-oriented and selective, has high expectations of himself and others, but also he doesn't like to delegate. He overthinks things, and he gets really unbalanced when plans go awry. The next one, which is this one has been confirmed by the Square Enix team, Ignis is our team mom. So that's being like a caretaker, mature, reliable, protective of those he loves. He also enjoys his corny puns and his wordplay, and of course he loves cooking. But he's also can be really overbearing and smothering at times. He's prone to nagging. He tends to conceal his own pain so as not to emotionally burden others, and he needs to be useful to feel valuable. And then our sort of deep down keyword, the one you probably don't expect, is passionate. He's deeply committed, he's extremely determined, he does nothing by half measures. He sometimes likes to show off a little bit. He is unerringly loyal, but he's also self-sacrificing. He could be reckless when he's emotional, and he has this sort of inner vengeful streak that comes out at times. Our incorrect keywords, I could have picked out a couple different ones. These are the ones I kind of settled on. Ignis is not aloof, like a lot of other tactician characters. He's actually very hands-on, and usually is very warm and charming in his presentation. He's not obstinate. This can happen with these sort of like team mom or team dad characters. He has very strong opinions about why he's right, but he's willing to listen to others and change course if need be, and he won't actively block people from making their own decisions. And in contrast to passionate, Ignis is not impulsive. Everything he does has a reason behind it. There's never anything he does just because. So as we already kind of hinted at, his relationship with Noctis in general is an integral part of his character. It's basically impossible to talk about Ignis's life without also talking about Noctis, since their relationship has entwined them both so tightly. Because of how the FF15 universe is structured, we can actually follow their relationship basically from start to finish. Unlike a majority of Final Fantasy characters, Noctis' life has a pretty clear through line if you're willing to piece together the different glimpses we get over the course of the series. The GDC panel, Bringing Fantasy to Life in Final Fantasy XV, which is done in 2017, the head of localization, Dan Inoue, refers to this approach as giving Noctis a life arc rather than simply a character arc. He also emphasized that all three of Noctis' companions are fully fleshed out characters in their own right. So they aren't sidekicks. Each one of them has his own brand of cool. Each can carry his own story. Each is the normal one in his own mind. And so it really keeps the give and take fresh because they all feel that they're right. And so to help us get a little bit of background on Noctis' and Ignis' relationship, we're going to sort of do a chronological view of things. And as it happens, the first scene in episode Ignis is also the moment that Noctis and Ignis meet. So we're going to go ahead and give that a little watch.
Listen well. A king cannot lead by standing still. A king pushes onward always, accepting the consequences and never looking back. That said, a king can accept nothing without first accepting himself. Should he stand still, I ask you to stand by him and lend him a hand, as his friend and as his brother. Please, take care of my son.
So we're going to hear these lines over the course of several different contexts. But this is the start of what basically is like the guiding principle of Ignis' life, which is take care of Noctis. And sometimes that plays out in big ways and small ways. We get hints about their childhood together, the sort of back and forth that existed, like even from the start, of Noctis as the precocious one and Ignis as the responsible one. And a lot of these sort of little glimpses we get are from like side content, like the episode Dusk Eye demo. There we go. Which featured an entire side quest about their shared love of astronomy, peppered in with memories of growing up together. I'm going to do my best to read out the dialogue here. So we have Ignis being like, "Fear not, Highness. This former early bird has grown into quite the night owl, thanks in part to accompanying a certain prince on his late-night larks." And we have, "Always wondered what a shooting star would look like in real life. I recall a rather artistic interpretation you did in the foyer floor when you were a child." And, "Hey Ignis, remember that book of constellations you had? The one I borrowed all the time? Yes, and then returned to me full of scratches and scribbles every time. You did quite fancy it, though. And it reminds me of all those times I tried sneaking out of my room and watching the stars." Just like these kind of interesting little memories that are sort of peppered in amongst different conversations. And while we're talking about the Dusk Eye demo, it also featured the localization team making some shifts and changes in characterizations between then and the final game. As seen here, originally Ignis wouldn't use Noctis's name. He would call him Highness instead. But this is deemed way too formal and kind of adding this unnecessary distance to their relationship. So they instead shifted in the final game to have Ignis use both Noctis and Noct interchangeably, as he does in Japanese. Now, there also is the Parting Ways drama CD, which includes a scene of Ignis and Noctis reminiscing about their frequent excursions while the two of them are packing up Noctis's childhood room at the Citadel. So this is going to be a Japanese voice acting clip, but there are subtitles and stage directions at the bottom of the screen to translate.
この部屋よく抜け出したよな。
ああ、よく付き合わされた。毎回気が気ではなかったが。
頼むから本を読んでてくれってキレてたやつもどっかにいたよな。
若かったな。いろいろな本を用意してみたが、王子が興味を示したのは図鑑くらいだったか。
ああ。
そのせいで昼夜を問わず抜け出すようになった。
ああ。嫌だったんだよな、窮屈で。ここにいるとみんな声かけてくるし。
みんな心配していたからな。
まあそうだよな。
あの怪我を負う前はそれは元気で騒がしい少年だったのが、
おとなしい少年になったからな。
あまりの変化に俺も戸惑った。
そっか。
だからまた部屋を抜け出すと言い始めた時は付き合わざるを得なかったな。まさか抜け出し癖がどんどん悪化していくとは思わなかったが。
ここでお前が怒られてたのを思い出すわ。
王子を連れ出すなとな。
あん時は悪かった。付き合ってくれて助かってたけど。
今さら恨みはしないさ。それも俺の役目だったからな。
I will bring out just something that was pointed out in chat that the Japanese and the subtitles are a little different. The subtitles were written by the localization team and are kind of more written towards how they write the characters in the localization, where there is some differences with the Japanese version. Anyway. So, our closest look at their past comes from the anime Final Fantasy XV Brotherhood in Episode 4, Bittersweet Memories. This is the longest of the 5 episodes and revolves around a conflict between Ignis and Noctis while Noctis is in high school. So we have Ignis, like ever devoted to serving Noctis and the crown, but he's really troubled by Noctis's difficulty at shifting to be more independent. And Noctis sort of has this sort of lack of commitment. He kind of alternates between apathy and really defensive outbursts. While not stated outright, all signs point to Noctis actually struggling with depression. And all of this is really exacerbated due to Noctis watching his father's health deteriorate, along with having these very real anxieties about having to eventually become king. And since this is Ignis' episode, we get to see him sort of dealing with these two conflicting sides of the give and take. So he's very frustrated trying to deal with and understand Noct, but at the same time he still wants to honor his promise to Regis to take care of Noct. Eventually, with some help from Gladio, the two come to an understanding. Ignis apologizes for berating Noctis and sort of starts quietly accepting that Noctis is kind of actually fully aware of the weight of his crown and is struggling more than he wants anyone to know. And in kind, Noctis makes an effort to take better care of himself and his duties, and kind of quietly acknowledging the care that Ignis shows him. They're able to sort of reconcile in their own quiet way, and we see them settle more into the rhythm we find later on, where Ignis cares for Noctis sometimes in kind of pushy ways, sometimes in small unspoken ways, sometimes in kind of teasing ways, and Noctis really trying but not always succeeding to live up to the high standards that Ignis sets for him. Also, we have their more comedic push and pull between the two of them. This episode also establishes the entire subplot of Ignis's love of cooking, that it grew out of his care of Noctis, and the symbol of that is the officially dubbed Memory Lane pastry. It's Ignis's personal quest to recreate a dessert Noctis had once as a child but could never find again. And it's something that Ignis has sort of been actively working on for years, as shown in the ending of this episode where Noctis tries the latest variation. And the stated reason for all this effort boils down to wanting just to make Noctis happy, which gets confirmed in all places in the King's Night tie-in event. Which I'll go ahead and read that for you. I have been placed in charge of cooking at the campsite recently, and it is gratifying to be commended for my culinary skills by my most trusted friends. In truth, I first developed my skills out of a desire to make one specific person smile, but then I was consumed, so to speak. Be it games or cooking, it is good to pursue something you are interested in. I hope one day we will meet in real life, and so that I can make you smile with a dish. Farewell. This was actually a really interesting kind of event. The player gets to befriend the FF15 characters in game, and then they get sent DMs from them, and you can read their group chat logs. It's actually a really interesting way to add some characterization outside the bounds of the main game. Now, this subplot actually does end up getting resolved in the game proper with the quest Buried Memories. The missing ingredient ends up being these Ulwat berries, and after eating a dish with them, Ignis is finally able to recreate the Memory Lane pastries. They were also brought to life at the Square Enix Cafe event. In case you're curious what they taste like, they are vanilla custard tarts accented with a mix of raspberries and blueberries. Also, before we move into the game proper, a bit of trivia about this episode. It was originally almost much different. Episode Ignis's director, Takafumi Terada, revealed at a fan event in Osaka in 2018 that it was almost about Ignis defending a teenage Noctis from a group of thugs, surprising both Noct and Prompto with how intensely he protected Noct. We're going to come back to that intensely protective side of Ignis later on in this panel. There we go. So now we're going to shift to talking about the game proper, mostly in broad strokes when it comes to the plot. But before we get into that, I want to talk about gameplay. FF15 features a focus on characterization via gameplay if possible. And I'm going to let character experience designer Sun discuss how they built in Ignis's concern for Noctis right into his AI, and then share the words of a fan that he feels explains this philosophy. This is all during his GDC 2018 panel, Walk Tall, My Friends, Giving Life to AI Buddies in FF15. Yeah, y'all like panels? Let's have a panel inside of our panel.
There should be the art of not saying something too out loud. So when you want to convince your player that Ignis is very concerned about Noctis, instead of, hey, I'm gonna show you a new cinematic of Ignis very concerned about Noctis, you got to watch them, hey. Instead of doing that, just make natural.
Certainly didn't expect this much trouble.
Doesn't look good.
Just prove it inside the gameplay, and that will be enough. And some player might get this at the first time they play the game. Some player might take 20 times, but they're going to get it. They're going to realize this someday. But when they realize it, the message is going to be more and more louder than just speak it out loud by showing them by cutscene and stuff. And I think it's on Tuesday, there were narrative competitions here in GDC where a lot of students write a summary for game narrative. And there's one girl writing she wrote a summary narrative for Final Fantasy 15. And there's one phrase she used in the poster, which I like really much, so I want to show you here. A narrative can be established through what is left unsaid, rather than what is explicitly stated. Ying-T He, 2018. This is perfect. I mean, this is what we are thinking, and the keyword we're just looking for. And this is what we wanted to do with our game.
All right. So it's kind of indicated the AI in FF15, both inside and outside of battle, is programmed with the characters' personalities in mind. And for the first portion of the game, follows a pattern of Ignis stays very close to Noctis and the player, Gladio kind of leads the charge, and Prompto is constantly in motion. Fitting with the game's themes of coming of age, the devs nicknamed this formation the teen phase. FF15 also built in a wide variety of animation with its AI sequences to further add to the feeling of camaraderie between the characters. So you can have these small moments, like Ignis will take Noctis's hand, pull him aside, and they'll sort of have a little impromptu strategy meeting. Or the two of them might share a passing fist bump between attacks in battle. All the characters have these different bits of animation like this, and no two interactions are exactly the same. There's always this little extra layer of personality behind them. And there are literal hours worth of party banter. Some of these are quick incidentals in battle. These can be small conversations while you're just walking around. That you have these sort of unique discussions about specific quest lines and through individual dungeons and events. And some of this kind of rides up right along the lines of how seriously can I take this?
Wow, this place is so romantic.
Then you get to enjoy it with us.
All three of us.
You are a lucky man.
And yes, that clip was part of the same panel we watched earlier. Additionally, over the course of the game, each of the bros has a different skill that sort of helps the team on their journey. And for Ignis, as we discussed... there we go. It's cooking. Over the course of the game, you can sort of find different ingredients, or you can try dishes at different restaurants. Players in the party alike can be greeted with Ignis's signature catchphrase.
That's it.
What's what?
I've come up with a new recipe.
Can't wait to try it.
I have to have the recipe in there. During recording, by the way, no one knew that that line was going to end up becoming a meme in the English-speaking fandom, but it has been very thoroughly embraced by both the fandom and the localization team. There's even like a whole unofficial cookbook inspired by Ignis at this point. Come on, there we go. So, let's actually go ahead and talk about the game! Let's talk about plot! I'm going to be talking about this in very, very broad strokes, just to cover the basics. I mentioned some of this earlier. We're going to be covering up until Chapter 9 in this sort of section of the summary. So, originally Noctis and his friends were set out from the crown city of Insomnia on a bit of a bachelor party road trip in the king's classic car, the Regalia, and he's been arranged to marry Lady Lunafreya the Oracle in accordance with the terms of a peace treaty. However, before they can leave Lucius, Insomnia falls to Imperial forces and Noct's father, King Regis, dies in the attack. Now, Luna had been present during this attack, and by the end of it, she manages to escape and it is entrusted with the Ring of the Lucii. That is a magical ring that grants the wearer incredible power, but only to those it deems worthy and always at a price. For those of the Kylum royal line, this price is sort of a slow draining of their life. But for the unworthy, it's often a loss of a vital part of themselves or just their life. The retinue remains in Lucius to sort of help the remaining Lucian forces, mainly the Crown's Guard headed by Marshal Corleonis. Core gameplay for the first 8 chapters involves seeking out the royal tombs. These are consecrated sites of the kings of yore, and they hold the royal arms, this powerful line of weapons. There's also forging covenants with the gods. Whole chapters are devoted to the trials of Titan and Ramu. And then wresting control from the Imperials by busting up the bases that they have set up. Bust a base, get used to it. The sort of constant presence throughout these chapters is the Niflheim Chancellor Arden Zunia, who alternates between helping and hindering the party in a capricious manner. The other antagonists that we're going to mark out, we're going to make them second to take note of, just because they come back for episode Ignis, are Ravus Nox Fleuret, that's Luna Freya's elder brother and a dangerous Imperial commander, and Kaligal Uldur, another Imperial commander. There we go. When the party finally manages to leave for Altissia, we get to chapter 9, and we're actually going to come back to all this in our discussion of episode Ignis, since that's when the DLC is set. I'm just going to do a very shorthand version of what happens for context for discussing the rest of the game, since this chapter has one of the biggest impacts on the plot. So, as Luna and Noctis seek the blessings of Leviathan and attempt to complete her trial, the Niflheim army attacks the city and the water goddess alike. In the ensuing chaos, Noctis is able to complete Leviathan's trial as Luna grants him access to the powers of the oracles and the kings of yore alike, and then protects him by both healing his injuries and then summoning Titan to fend off Leviathan and the Nifs. But the injuries that Luna sustains, from including being stabbed by Arden, mean that Luna perishes upon the altar after having passed the ring into Noctis' possession. As for Ignis, he loses his sight during the attack, and that's something we're going to be talking about in detail later on when we go back to episode Ignis. For now, though, we're actually going to be talking about Ignis' role over the rest of the main game. And we're going to slow down just a little bit. We're going to talk about one chapter in particular in more detail. So Ignis ends up as the focal point of Chapter 10. The chapter is titled Heart of a King, and the main quest line is The Hand of the King, as both the party and the player have to adjust to his disability. It starts not too long after you take control when you encounter one of the most emotional choice prompts in the game. Take Ignis along or leave Ignis behind. The game sort of takes this bit of time to make you linger there and weigh your options, to debate whether you prefer leaving Ignis behind but hoping he'll remain safe, or just refusing to abandon Ignis even if it means the possibility of putting him in yet more danger. In the end, though, regardless of your choice, Ignis decides to accompany the party. And the game then deliberately tells you to go slow and accommodate Ignis as much as possible. But there is this expectation that the player, that Noctis, will make mistakes, and both Gladio and Prompto will chide you for moving too fast or fighting too recklessly around Ignis. The whole game's AI system updates to accommodate this change. Ignis will now stand back from the rest of the party, and Prompto will remain close beside Ignis to watch over him, while Gladio, and then by extension Noctis, will be the ones expected to act as the frontline fighters. This is nicknamed the pre-adult phase by the developers. You also lose access to Ignis' recipes as he is no longer able to cook. And the entire camp atmosphere just changes should you choose to use the area's one campsite. Instead of Ignis' delicious homemade meals, you have only food tins, and if you thought to buy some earlier, cup noodles. And just gone are all the familiar bits of banter, the little animated sequences of everyone chatting and relaxing together. Even the music turns sad and slow. There's this sort of like thick, oppressive tension in the air. It's the first really visceral consequence of the plot on the actual gameplay mechanics as well as the character dynamics. Like earlier in Chapter 5, you lose access to the regalia and instead have to travel around by foot or by chocobo. But these are things that players are already inclined to do naturally. And this situation is just clearly weighing down on all of the characters. Partway through the chapter, Gladio pulls Noctis aside and asks him about his duty, and the dialogue option for show frustration reveals Noc's own issues on the matter, that his just his guilt over how many sacrifices have been made on his behalf, those who got hurt and died because of him. There are already these holes that exist in Noctis's heart, left behind by those he has loved and lost, and with Ignis there's no real distraction to let him process, no place for him to turn emotionally while they're all suffering. There's only this resentment towards the cruelty of fate. This is a more subtle theme that sort of festers under FF15's main message about making hard choices and moving forward, but every so often it kind of, rears its head. And for both Noctis and the player, watching Ignis, someone who up until now has only been seen as capable and reliable, watching him struggle and knowing that there's no way to help him, only to try the best to adapt, it's a very sobering experience. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I was someone who had figured out before the game came out that Ignis was going to lose his sight. And even so, when it came to this chapter, I spent a solid portion of my original playthrough just sobbing as I tried to navigate the area. It hurts so much to see everyone struggling, and I really did feel like I was part and parcel to that struggle. But the game doesn't leave Ignis sidelined for long. At the end of the chapter, he regains the will to fight and begins to start adapting to being blind. And as everyone sort of talks about what to do, the words Ignis speaks are ones that, when we're covering things chronologically, that we've heard before, that Noctis and Ignis have heard before.
A moment. Is everything okay?
It bloody well isn't. And I won't suffer this pointless bickering in silence any longer. Let's be frank. My vision hasn't improved, and probably won't. Yet in spite of this, I would remain with you all. To the very end.
Sorry, but I object. War is a matter of life and death.
But we'll be there.
It's not about us looking out for him.
Uh-huh. Then he should be free to choose.
There's more to it than just what he wants.
I know full well. I won't ask you to slow down. If I cannot keep up, I will bow out.
What says His Majesty?
Noct, you are king. One cannot lead by standing still. A king pushes onward, always, accepting the consequences and never looking back. Gladio, Noct will take his rightful place, but only once he's ready.
Have it your way. We're still taking a big risk. We better all be ready.
All right. So, know it's time for more broad strokes recaps. So after his speech, Ignis begins to sort of move on and come to better terms with himself and his new reality. He starts adapting to his vision loss and begins to find ways to carry on as he did previously. And he begins to sort of start opening up with what happened in Altissia. But as we will figure out later, what Ignis offers here is a cover-up. This is one of the few times we can actually catch him full-on lying to Noctis. We're much more likely to see Ignis lie via omniscience rather than via, direct deception. Additionally, not shown here, he also claims that his final sight was of Arden's personal airship. We're going to come back to that point in a big way later. Even if this is all sort of like a lie, Noctis' answer back is at least comforting. The next few chapters cover the party's very rocky road to the Imperial capital, wherein Prompto gets... he ends up the victim of one of Arden's plots and is separated from the party and then captured by Imperials. There's a whole DLC about that. They discover that Luna's home country of Tenebrae has been attacked by demons. Shiva steps in to assist Noctis but can only offer so much help. And finally, Arden returns and sabotages the train that everyone is on, forcing Noctis, Gladio, and Ignis to ride the Regalia, which has been held in the cargo of that same train, to demolition in a frantic escape. Yes, this game makes you mourn the death of a car, and I mean that with 100% seriousness. So we get to chapter 13. That's probably the most controversial of all the chapters in FF15. And we see Noctis separated from his friends, meant to wander through the labyrinth of Zegnotis Keep, filled with various demons and magic tech troopers. He's forced to finally utilize the Ring of the Lucii, something he's been actively avoiding out of fear and guilt, and the whole moment sort of shudders with tension as Noctis's hands are wavering as he puts it on. And even the simple act of just sliding the ring on is clearly painful, even for Noctis, who's the rightful wielder of it. Now, later patches of the game added in an alternate version of Chapter 15 that instead follows Gladio and Ignis through their own travels into the keep. Gladio is the only really playable character here. Ignis is sort of more of a guest character rather than a full-fledged party member for this portion. But all throughout their separation, Ignis's thoughts keep drifting back to Noctis, and he's the one who eventually hears their way to Noctis. Full disclosure, I have tried my damnedest to see if you can hear what Ignis does in this scene, and honestly, I cannot pick up anything. I have theories about this, but we'll save that for Q&A if we have time for it. But the party is eventually all reunited by the end of the chapter, but sadly not for very long. When an opportunity arises for Noctis to seek out the crystal's power, all three of them sort of urge him to go for it. So Noctis is finally able to reach the crystal and make a request for its power, asking specifically, "Please help me stop the demons." Make note of that request for later. And it answers him back by drawing him inside of it, literally kicking and screaming as Arden appears to reveal his true nature as the Accursed, an immortal being who was once a healer in the founding days of Lucius, one of the original heirs to his throne, and then corrupted by the very scourge he sought to heal. And his ultimate plan is basically to wait until the crystal has fully instilled Noctis with its power before killing Noctis to exact his revenge on the entire Kylum bloodline and deny the world salvation at Noctis's hands. The other three do arrive here, but it's all just too late. The wheels of fate have already been set in motion. So during the next 10 years, we can only sort of make out rough sketches about what happens to the party. We know that Noctis spends it inside the crystal, wherein Bahamut informs him that the true nature of the crystal's power. It will stop the demons as he has asked, but in turn, the blood price of this magic will be Noctis's own life, and that has always been his fate as the Chosen King. Noctis then enters into reflection, and the crystal shows him glimpses of thousands of years of history and millions of lives across Eos as the stone sheds its light into the ring. It's basically a decade-long magical PowerPoint presentation. But when he emerges on the Isle of Angel Guard, he comes back to a world in ruin. As for Ignis, we get these sort of small sketches about how he spends his time. You can encounter him in the Comrades DLC as an optional single-player boss fight as he continues to retrain himself, which eventually does prove successful. He's basically able to completely relearn how to fight and how to cook by the time the 10 years is up. Additionally, he also enlists Talcott. This was a kid that we meet early on in FF15, but we encounter him again as an adult in Chapter 14. Talcott's also from a family of royal retainers, to help him research the royal tombs and any archives they can still locate in order to have a better understanding of Arden and his powers. And all in all, he's ready for Noct's return alongside Gladio and Prompto. The reunion between the three is sort of playful and casual. I did want to note that Noctis does make sure to touch Ignis in addition to speaking to him, giving him this additional physical proof that he's really back. So in the Royal Edition, that's basically the definitive edition of the game, does add in extra content to fill out this chapter better. It sees Noctis and his party team up with the remaining Kingsglaive to help rid Insomnia of the demons, in addition to fighting against Arden directly. And a number of these new moments tie back into the different DLC episode themes. Probably the most, important one for us is the new boss fight against the Mystic, during which Ignis takes the lead. We have these quotes of, "I will see to it that nothing stands in Noct's way. I will do whatever it takes, no matter the cost." Keep those quotes in mind. We're going to be seeing them later. There's also additional changes to the AI and to the banter in this chapter. We finally reached the adult phase of the AI that has Prompto sort of covering support from the rear of the party or fighting alongside Noctis, Gladio doing his best to cover the field, and surprisingly, Ignis is probably one of the more aggressive fighters. And the small bits of banter that we get can be both incredibly poignant and heartwarming and just all bittersweet. Sorry for the video quality here. This is the best version I could find of these lines.
Ignis, can you sense light?
To a degree, yes.
So when dawn breaks, you'll know it.
I should.
Good to know.
I recall a young prince leaving his mark on a painting. Is it still there?
I don't think anyone could spot it. Had one of my attendants cover it up pretty good. Ignis, can you...
Come on. There we go. Videos, they're hard, yo. So in the end, Noctis is able to defeat Arden and finally face his destiny. At the final send-off, Ignis is the one who speaks to Noctis last, wishing him to take care, even as he walks to his death, and calling him Majesty one last time. That's another little thing to hold on to for later. Additionally, before the end comes, Noctis remarks fondly on Luna, the guys, and his dad before taking his place upon the throne. And I'm not going to show the ending here because it's pretty painful to watch as Noctis is sacrificed upon the throne. But it does bring the dawn as promised and ends the scourge of the demons, and at last, Eos is able to move on from the long, dark night. Alright, I know that was like a lot, that was like 50 minutes worth of context, but I assure you it is all very necessary so we can talk about episode Ignis with all of this really fresh in our minds. Because episode Ignis is absolutely meant to be played with the full game in mind, and its ending. And we're going to see that in a big way. So let's start with a little bit of info. So episode Ignis was the last of the 3 sort of bro episodes to be released, coming out on December 13th, 2017, which is basically about a year after FF15's release. And we're actually going to start our discussion of the DLC proper by observing the title screen, how Ignis faces away from the camera, the apprehension that's clear in him, the muted tones of the background, the little flicker of fiery sparks. And we're actually going to listen to the main melody of the theme song. And I really want you all to listen for the violin. All right. I'm going to keep that music going, but now I'm going to start talking over it. Now, some of this music might feel sort of vaguely familiar to you, even if you've never heard the song before. Each one of FF15's DLC episodes had a different guest composer, and each one of them wrote unique theme songs for Gladio, Prompto, and Ignis in turn. Ignis' theme song was crafted by Yasunori Mitsuda. That's the composer of games like Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross and Xenogears, to name a few. And yes, you can imagine how I was very personally hyped when he was announced as the guest composer. And he had some very insightful commentary on the instrumentation he chose to represent Ignis. But the quiet feelings Ignis hides away in the bottom of his heart. How he carries himself when he's fighting. Expressing all of that within the musical phrases of a violin solo, I think really fits with this game. This is a thought to keep in mind this whole sort of time. Come on, there we go. So, like with the main plot of FF15, I will be sketching out the DLC's main plot in some broad strokes before I narrow down the scenes that are essential to a queer reading. But we just sort of start with the baseline premise. Episode Ignis takes place during the climax of Chapter 9 of FF15, in the aftermath of Noctis' battle with Leviathan in Altissia, and centers itself around Ignis' attempts to locate Noctis and to protect Noctis, and kind of by extension Luna, amid the chaos after he is separated from both Gladio and Prompto. So most of the gist of the first chapter has Ignis clearing out various sectors of Altissia, only really able to move on once the Imperial forces have been pushed back. In parallel to Noctis' ability to warp around the battlefield, Ignis acquires a hook shot to help him traverse the city. His playstyle revolves around spell daggers that can shift between different elements, as well as a combo damage multiplier and a limit break called Total Clarity. Oh, also, recipes! So plot of this section is really delivered via short bits of radio conversation, so we can have a few clips to illustrate. So this is where clips are going to start requiring content notes. Basically, all of these are going to contain canon-typical violence. The first one has Ignis witnessing the ongoing battle between the Imperial forces and Titan. And it has this very clear contrast to this like sort of big, noisy set piece, like all this plot going on. And then Ignis' quiet feelings, barely like a whisper under his breath. And we're going to keep hearing all these little tiny prayers for Noctis' safety. And they're this running theme throughout the episode. And I'm going to try and like point out like as many of them as I can. And then in the next clip, Ignis is going to contact Weskham Armagh, who is a former advisor to King Regis, who now lives and works in Altissia, and Camilla Claustra. She's the first secretary and the leader of Altissia, for aid in between battles.
Weskham here. The Empire has the Archean surrounded. Until he smashes their ships, that is.
And I need to get to the altar before that happens.
You could try crossing the eastern bridge, if it's still standing.
Here's to hoping. Heading that way now. Wish me luck.
Fingers crossed.
Madam Secretary, come in.
What now?
I need your help. I fear Noct is in danger.
I'll visit the entire city of Altissia in case you haven't taken a look around. He and his girlfriend are probably long gone.
No. I made a promise to keep him safe. A promise I intend to keep.
Oh, noble. I'll see what my men can do, but I won't promise anything.
Alright, so at this point, our two antagonists enter the stage. We have both Caligo and Ravis. The Imperial Army is sort of stymied by Titan protecting both Noct and Luna after she summoned him, and Ravis makes plans to head in quietly on his own. They discuss how both Noctis and Luna are currently in danger if this fighting continues. And Ravis is quick to point out that while the Empire might want to recover the Ring of the Lucii, they need someone alive who can wear it. Something that Ravis learned about firsthand. After overhearing this conversation, it spurs Ignis onward to the docks to procure a boat. Along the way, has an additional conversation with the Altician forces as well as Gladio and Prompto. The second conversation is actually kind of notable for how the situation has left the normally composed Ignis very distracted, and he actually forgets to answer them.
Attention, all units. Assemble at the docks and prepare for withdrawal immediately. We depart in 3 minutes.
Wait! I'm headed to the altar. I need a boat!
Have you lost your marbles?
No, but we'll lose the king if we don't act.
Give him what he wants.
Understood.
Give my thanks.
Keep them. I'll take Gil instead. Do you copy?
Ain't a hard question, Iggy. Do you copy? Yes or no?
Yes, I copy.
Then speak up next time! Look, we're just as worried as you are. But we can't go losing our heads. If we want to save Noct, we've got to keep it together.
Yes. I suppose you're right.
We'll keep moving.
Yeah.
Hang in there, Iggy.
I will.
And then we get to the boat portion of the DLC, and guess who died a bunch during the boat portion? Spoilers, it's me. Here's your lesson. Boats in FF15 are bad, but trains are worse. Anyway, the boat portion sees Ignis speeding directly into the fray in between Titan and the Imperials. We still have more of those little prayers sneaking in there. Only to be accosted by Caligo before he can reach the altar. Then there's sort of this chase sequence that has Ignis going down this canal before there ends up being a boss fight. In case the player has forgotten, since Caligo was a minor antagonist at best, he's sure to remind them by mentioning both his role as the commander of Fort Valderay, as well as his role in the death of a friend of the party, Jared Hester, at his hands. And so he sort of serves as the boss of this chapter in his mech. But at the end, Caligo meets his end on the end of Ravis's sword, and that's where we close out the chapter. Elevators are actually fine in FF15, to answer chat. So, Ravis now joins Ignis for the next portion of the story, as Ravis kind of rebels against the Empire. I mentioned him earlier in passing, but let's actually discuss a little bit about Ravis. Like I said, he's Luna Freya's older brother, and while, aligned with the Empire as one of their commanders, he basically does so for the privileges that it affords him, and a way to try and basically safeguard Luna. Basically, he's on no one's side but his own and Luna's, no one else's. He doesn't owe allegiance to anyone else. And we just sort of had that confirmed with how he takes out Caligo, who stands in his way. So he bears this grudge towards Lucius and its royal family for not doing enough to save his mother and their country for Empire rule. And he generally considers Noctis to be an unworthy successor to the throne and not fit to wield the crystal's power. Previously, he did attempt to steal the Ring of the Lucii, which resulted in it rejecting him so thoroughly that he lost his arm, and it has since been replaced by a magic tech prosthetic. And the last time the party encountered him, he was just itching for a fight, which we sort of saw earlier. But for now, their interests are aligned with, his and Ignis's interests are aligned. Their goals are the same. Ravus confesses that he betrays the Empire because he wants to save Lunafreya, and saving Noctis is sort of like an ancillary thing to him. Both Ignis and Ravus continue to clash as Ravus keeps like disparaging Noctis, questioning if he is the true king, and just saying that he doesn't understand the gravity of the issues facing the world. But by the end of their time working together, Ignis and Ravus sort of have this sort of begrudging respect towards one another as they make their way towards the altar. Before Ignis can approach the altar at last, he finds Luna's literal angel dog, Prina, on the verge of death. With the last bit of her strength, Prina delivers a final message to Ignis. It's a glimpse of the prophecy Bahamut will pass on to Noctis, revealing that in order to save the world, the king must sacrifice his own life as the blood price for the magic required to completely purge the world of demons. Ignis doesn't quite know what to make of the vision, like if it's really a true glimpse of the future, or just maybe one of many possibilities of what could come to pass. Something I didn't really bring up earlier, but no one other than Regis, Luna, and Arden know Noctis' true fate as a sacrifice, and that fact has been very carefully hidden from Noctis his entire life. Noctis and everyone else assume that the crystal will gift Noctis some sort of magic that he can use to fight the demons instead. But there's really no time to contemplate what Ignis has just seen, as the two of them finally arrive at their destination. While Ignis finds that Noctis has survived the trial, Ravus learns that Lunafreya has not. Between the astral attacks, the use of her powers to aid Noctis, and the stab wound she receives from Arden, Luna does not survive. And seeing the light literally fade from her, Ravus just falls into this vengeful rage that is targeted on Noctis, who he blames for her death. And Ignis has no choice but to defend his currently defenseless king against his, sort of temporary ally. My favorite part about this screenshot is definitely left party Ravus. The boss fight is sort of marked by Ignis desperately trying to talk Ravus down the entire time, reminding him about Lunafreya fulfilling her calling and such. But Ravus counters back. I do love this line. Don't try to justify this. She didn't need to die. It's so good and visceral. And he Ravus just points out the unfairness of it all. Ignis tries to reason with him that no one else should understand Noctis better than Ravus. They're both bereft of both parents. They're forced to carry on despite losing those that they love, and they both feel that pain, but Ravus just feels nothing at this point. And it's just this theme of the cruelty of fate that we had earlier, and starting to creep into this DLC where it becomes more and more poignant. After Ignis is able to defeat Ravus, only then is Ravus able to go and then grieve over Lunafreya, as her spirit passes on to the beyond. That's FF15's term for where souls touched by immortality go, and that includes the oracles. When it seems as though Gladio has located them, Ravus quickly identifies him as Arden underneath a magical disguise. But it's really too late for both Ignis and Ravus, as they are apprehended in an Imperial ambush. So, we're going to swap to watching clips of the climax of the story, so that way we can sort of have the full experience and drive home the point in a more emotional way. So the next story clip is where Ignis is pinned down and forced to watch Arden threaten Noctis' life. While we won't see much of it in the clip, I'm going to show you during the scene where Ignis is pinned down, you can change the camera angle to a wide shot, to Ignis' POV shot, or to a close-up of Ignis as he struggles to break free. In this case, the Ignis POV shot is what was mainly used.
Come now, why not follow your liege's lead and stop resisting?
Never!
You risked life and limb to safeguard the King of Kings. only to witness him fail so spectacularly. You must be so disappointed.
Unhand him!
I know I am. Oh, what good is a world that only ever lets you down? Why not end it all right here?
No. You can't. Noct!
My, you two certainly have become fast friends. Permit me to make a suggestion. Rather than follow this flotsam and float away to a watery grave, why not come with me? What do you say?
Alright, let me also make sure I'm going to adjust my volume just a teeny tiny bit. Yeah. So we finally have reached the actual, like, crux point of all of this. Arden has offered Ignis a choice, but we only have one option available to us currently. For now, there is only the thought of fighting back, of protecting Noctis no matter what. And we as the player have to follow through on the path laid out before Ignis. So I've sort of been talking around the sacrifice that Ignis made to protect Noctis for a long time in this panel. I've also kept quiet about exactly what transpired, kind of like how the game did. I pointed out earlier that when he had the chance to tell Noctis, Ignis chose to lie instead. That he couldn't let Noctis know about the risk he's about to take here. About how there might have been much more than his sight that he lost in this moment. So warnings for the next clip, we're going to have more canon-typical violence, there's going to start having the fire imagery, the painful magical rites, and there's going to be a good amount of screaming coming up.
I'll take that as a no.
I swore an oath to stand with Noct and keep him safe. Whatever it takes, I will protect him.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
I may not be of blood, but if a glaive can harness its power, then so can I! Kings of Lucis, lend me your strength!
Well, they've shown you their favor after all. Well, if you're so keen on keeping him safe, I'd like to see you drop. No time to waste now. If you aren't quick about it, you're the one liable to wind up dead. What a pity they're all too soft to show
This is it!
But why not cease this futile charade? Your appeal to hope and loyalty will all come to naught in the end. No! Phew, wasn't that exhilarating? I think that's enough for one day.
Nox.
Alright! So that, whole sequence is what I've been building up to this, entire time! We've talked so much about all the little ways that Ignis cares for Noct, this, sort of quiet dedication he's shown the entire time, and all of that just coming to the forefront and literally blazing out of him when he needs it most. And I can't ignore how poetic it is that Ignis's act of sacrifice, his act of love, takes place upon an altar, and its power is manifested by wearing Noctis's ring. I know the Ring of the Lucii isn't a one-to-one wedding ring metaphor, but it's something a bit different than that, but the symbolism there is too much for me to just sort of ignore and cast aside. And we finally get to know what is truly Ignis's final sight. The image burned forever into his mind. The last thing he ever sees is Noctis. And that image being accompanied by the subtle but undeniable sound of Ignis's heartbeat only adds to the scene. And in the end, it's enough. It's enough to save Noctis here and now. We'll watch the small sort of follow-up clip that happens after the battle. There's no more warnings for the rest of the clips in these sections, except that they are very, very sad. For anyone who wonders about the context about the If a Glaive line, that's a reference to the movie Kingsglaive, where the protagonist in that movie, Nix Ulrich, utilizes the ring's power at the cost of his life to help Luna escape with it.
That was rather reckless.
Where's Noct? Is he all right?
More or less. All thanks to you.
Thank goodness.
Iggy! Where are you?
Be still. Conserve your strength. You've a calling to fulfill.
Noct! Iggy!
As do I. May fortune favor us both. And you as well, Noctis.
Please, forgive me.
And looking over that scene, just the fact that Ignis's first concern remains on Noctis, Ignis is half dead and gone blind. Oh god, it just says so much. It speaks, that's all he talks to Ravis about in that moment. Nothing else matters. The whole time he's just been whispering these quiet feelings, his little hopes for Noctis to simply be safe. And he's fulfilled in that hope, but it's at such a high price. And Ravis kind of shows his support. He's seen the lengths of devotion that those who believe in Noct will go to protect him. He's seen it with Ignis right before him. He saw it with Luna as well. It's enough to make Ravis start reevaluating his role in the coming story. Spoiler: favor does not fortune Ravis. Fortune does not favor Ravis. There, I got there. He very unfortunately dies a pretty terrible death later on in the story, which I kind of glossed over in my broad strokes version of things. But what really hurts my heart here is that Ignis asks for forgiveness after all of this, because he knows he knows Noct will bear the burden of yet more guilt, of yet more sacrifices made in his name, and Ignis doesn't want that. He knows even in saving Noctis he's hurt him as well. There's this wound that exists between them now. It will scar over eventually, but we know from Chapter 10 how it will bleed and how much pain it will cause everyone. And as for Ignis, he never wanted to burden anyone else with his pain, and therefore his pain is worth apologizing for. So each DLC has a scene during the credits that adds further context. For episode Ignis, we have a conversation that happens after Noct has recovered from his injuries in Altissia. But before the party sort of starts back on their journey, I'm going to let that scene play out, and then I'm actually going to talk over the credits music, and then we'll pause before we reach the post-credits scene.
How are you feeling?
Noct. Perhaps it might be best if we brought our journey to a close.
Why?
It's just that, we've already lost so much. Too much.
Are you kidding me? That's exactly why I have to keep going. Because if I give up now, their sacrifices would have been for nothing. And you of all people. You should know that better than anyone.
The decision is yours to make, and yours alone. But do remember, we will stand with you always, and help you bear your burdens. Don't be afraid to let us share the load. I'll be back.
There's so many little touches to this scene, for the fact that Ignis can't bear to face Noctis directly, to let Noctis see the proof of his pain. There's Noctis refusing to let Ignis' sacrifice be in vain, and instead it kind of propels him onward in their quest, even though it hurts so much. And like I said, there's this distance between them now that's brought about by guilt and trauma of everything, and neither one of them really know how to cope with it. And then there's sort of that lingering knowledge that Ignis has, that possibility that Noctis completing this journey and fulfilling his duty will only end in Noctis' death. And that very possibility is enough for Ignis to just rethink everything. And even with everything Ignis has done, everything Ignis has suffered, he still continues to push and sacrifice himself in service to taking care of Noctis, to putting Noctis above everything else. And the credit roll kind of covers a lot of what we've talked about so far. And at the very, very end, they're going to reference the final campfire scene that takes place in the main game. Unfortunately, it is a bit long to both watch that scene and analyze it, so I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick summary before we watch the episode Ignis' final credit scene. first I gotta let the credits finish rolling. Yes, it is sad camping time, y'all. So the scene itself is Noctis confessing with a great deal of struggle and emotion that while he has made his peace with his fate, with his death, being with the 3 closest people in his life again, just, you know, knowing that this is it just makes it all the harder for him to fulfill the cruel fate that's been set before him. And everyone just kind of has to sit with that fact and just quietly acknowledge what's happening and what's coming and what fate has taken from them and what it will take from them further. I highlighted Ignis's reaction to the confession because it's about to become really relevant. And there's sort of the final line of the campfire scene, and there's debate around it. In English, it is, "You guys are the best." But the punch really isn't pulled in Japanese, where the line is, "I love you all." And it's with that in mind that we're going to watch this campfire scene, which directly follows the original one.
You know, looking back, it wasn't all bad.
I suppose we had some fun along the way.
And our fair share of trouble, too. But I don't have any regrets. Luna and you guys brought me this far, and now I'm on my own.
No, you won't be going alone.
No, you're right. I mean, I wouldn't have made it all this way without you guys. Why stop now? In the end, I might not have you at my side, but I'll always have you in my heart. Thanks. Thanks for everything, Iggy.
Okay, so that was like super duper sweet, especially when combined with the original campfire scene, and it serves as like this sort of like nice little coda on things. We're just going to break it down just a bit further though. So Nox promised to keep everyone he loves close in his heart as he plans to face his death alone is equal parts heartwarming and heartbreaking, that he will sacrifice all for those who have sacrificed him in order to give them a world worth saving. It shows just how much Noctis has grown as a character and as a king. And I want to point out the little reflection in Ignis's visor during the scene is such a poignant touch, because we know that Ignis's last sight was of Noctis, and that image of him at age 20 is still burned into his mind a decade later. This is actually pretty common with people who lose their sight later in life, to keep visualizing loved ones as they last saw them, and that mental image never really updating. And just as clear in his mind and as close in his heart is that memory of when they first met like 24 years ago. And the recreation of it, and Noctis expressing his gratitude for all Ignis has done for him, big and small, is enough to bring tears to both eyes. Even his bad one that's usually closed off and dormant, and coming with Ignis's nickname attached to it just makes it all the sweeter. And I want you all to keep that nickname in mind for later. And it's just this really beautiful way to bookend things between the two that starts and ends with the same gentle touch, the same warm smile, and the same love that has existed this entire time. But before we completely move on, I'm going to loop back to an earlier line, and I really want to point out the moment where Ignis was ready to correct Noctis and insists on enjoining him until the end. Until Noctis' death. He backs down when Noct pushes forward, but the thought, the desire is there, and that's about to come way more relevant in the next section. Also, because I've been giving heads up for fire imagery, the next title card will feature it. And let me adjust volume slightly. So, remember how I said we needed to know the main plot of Final Fantasy XV to appreciate Verse 1 of Episode Ignis? Well, we had to talk about Verse 1 so we can appreciate Verse 2, and this is where our close reading is really going to begin. Now, normally for the other DLC, that sort of cute little after-credits scene we would have just seen would have just wrapped up all the specific episode themes, tied it back into the main narrative, and reinforced the importance of the bonds between Noctis and his friends. But episode Ignis, it ain't like the other DLC. And I'm going to let DLC director Takafumi Terada explain what's different in this little snippet from the FF15 official works. First, we decided on 3 important things. First was that this was going to be the story of Ignis putting his life on the line to save his king. Second was that the game was to have a multi-ending format that would stand against the cruel fate of the main game. Third was to do total fan service. The execution and the story were designed on the principle of satisfying people who love Ignis and FF15 with all of our might. So, you know, we've already sort of been talking about how his relationship with Noctis is an integral part of his character this whole, time. And we get to really talk about the power of alternate timelines. So, FF15 has these 3 main timelines: original game, episode Ignis Verse 2, and Dawn of the Future. And based off of info from the dev team, you might also throw in the Omen trailer and possibly the original, after credit scene of the main game. We're up to maybe 5 timelines in play. We're only going to be concerned with episode Ignis Verse 2 for the sake of this panel. By the way, here's how this all looks like officially. And I made sure to make a note as to where Verse 2 lives in all of this. So Verse 2 begins with the decision point we saw earlier, except now Ignis can either fight back or play along with Ardyn. The game is actually very helpful here. It lets you skip right to this point if you beat Verse 1. Deciding to play along has Ignis taken prisoner by Ardyn in exchange for Noctis' safety. When he wakes up in Zegnauta's keep, Ardyn informs him that the crystal is here and then invites him to investigate as he wishes. Along the way, Ignis is beset upon by another set of visions. These reveal to Ignis 3 things. First, Ardyn's history as both the accursed and as being of the line of Lucis, that gods and men have been awaiting the ascension of the chosen king, and that king is indeed Noctis. And that the crystal holds the power that the chosen king will use to purge the scourge of the demons. And a confirmation of the previous versions, the previous vision, that this power will only come with Noctis' sacrificial death. So these visions are delivered by an entity listed only as Mysterious Voice, but given that in all versions of the game this voice is played by Luna Freya's voice actress, most people have taken this to mean that Luna herself might be aiding Ignis, and we're going to come back to that point, so hold on to it. But eventually Ignis reaches the crystal and a whole new path unfolds before him. We're going to be watching a slightly abridged version of the sequence that happens when Ignis arrives at the crystal chamber, basically until the start of the boss fight for this path. We're basically skipping over the unwinnable fight that happens between Ignis and Ardyn here. Also, typical violence, fire imagery, magical rites, and screaming are our content warnings. Oh, also mild body horror. Sorry, I forgot that one.
Why are you after Noct? For revenge?
In a sense, yes. But my aims extend beyond the boy. He's more of a means to an end. I suppose I never revealed my proper name, so allow me to introduce myself. Lucis Kylan.
The Founder King?
If only. No, that would be my dear brother, who snatched the throne and cast me into exile. I've never been called your majesty before. Would you do me the honor?
My allegiance lies with the true king alone.
Well then, off with your head.
Drat.
You see, the revenge I seek is not upon the boy. I only wish to punish the crystal that cast me aside in favor of that insufferable fool. He's certainly taking his sweet time ascending as its champion, though. Would there were a way to expedite the process! Oh!
This world means nothing to me. Do with it as you wish.
How did you get your hands on that?
But I refuse to let Noct sacrifice his life to save ours. I won't let you take him away. Even if it costs my own life to save him. I will pay that price!
Take care not to hurt yourself.
Okay, so this whole scene of Ignis choosing to activate the ring plays out very differently. And we know at this point Ignis is fully aware that Noctis is fated to be a sacrificial lamb, to offer up his life for the sake of the greater good. And up until this point, everyone with that knowledge, that's mainly like Regis and Luna, have accepted this reality and have worked towards forwarding this agenda without Noctis' knowledge or consent. Ignis is the first one to refuse that fate. And in that moment of refusal, we see this very different side of Ignis, still endlessly devoted, still willing to give up anything, everything for Noctis, but also willing to let a world that would allow such cruel fates burn. Because in this moment, Ignis realizes his true feelings on the matter, and they are not quiet in the least. They are this roaring fire that a world without Noctis is a world that is not worth saving. And in that line of, I won't let you take him away, the unspoken from me is palatable. It's right there in the intensely protective snarl that the camera zooms in on. This is personal, almost impossibly so for Ignis. There is no price too high for him if it means protecting Noctis. And not Noctis Lucius Kylan, the chosen king, the bearer of the dawn, destined to purge our star of its scourge. But Noct, the guy who likes to go fishing, the guy who will sweet-talk a stray cat, who wears the most ridiculous hats, who can't stand carrots, and who whines about beans. That Noctis. Iggy's dear Noct. Also, thank you, Orin, for sharing this shot that they have from their own game with me for this panel. And this is, the person we're talking about, not the crown. There are so many others who fight for the king, but Ignis fights for Noctis alone. And this is the same Noctis that we, the players, know and love. The Noctis we desperately want to save here too, because we are just as furious over his fate. And Ignis knows what type of price he'll have to pay to undo such a fate. If you slow down, you can even see the tears welling up in his eyes as he realizes this is going to cost him his life. And at the end of the scene, it's really summed up with how we see the blood price being paid, with that precious memory of their first meeting. The sound of Ignis's heartbeat is missing amid the swell of music this time, because this time around, Ignis has offered his life in exchange for keeping Noctis safe. And it's a life that in so many ways blossomed with that first tentative smile, that Ignis has gone to great lengths to protect and inspire, as we know. From this moment onward, Ignis is going to move heaven and earth and the very fates themselves in order to save Noctis. So we're going to go through this section talking about how most players experience it, and that is with its unique game over sequence. It's not only entirely possible to fail the Arden boss fight, but it's basically expected that you will fail the first time. So this is going to be a death sequence, y'all, and it's going to end on Ignis's last words.
Ooh, for a moment, I felt death's chill wind. But then, I remembered I'm immortal. Such is my blessing and my curse. At least you won't have to spend your last moments alone. As luck would have it, your beloved Noctis is on his way to save you as we speak. I wonder what he'll do when he sees his friend's life fade before his eyes. I all but laid the crystal out on a silver platter for him, but he still wouldn't come of his own accord. That's why I needed you. With the crystal and the ring, the boy has everything he needs right here. All that's left is to give him a little nudge. Your magic engine pushes him ahead.
I don't want to die without him.
There we go. So, I'm going to be pointing out, like, two things in particular about this scene, both of which are basically, like, bright neon signs in contrast to what have been, like, more, like, subtextual context clues. The first is your beloved Noctis, which is a pretty poignant choice of words, even when spoken by the game's villain. Also, I can't do this while looking at Arden's ridiculous face, so I'm going to swap to a different screenshot. This isn't the first time Arden has used such loaded terminology. There's a pretty infamous line in the fandom during Chapter 13, with Arden speaking to Noctis and talking about your dear Prompto, for example. This line sticks out a lot because it's unique to the English version of the game. Now, obviously, localization is a very tricky thing at the best of times and involves this sort of delicate dance of preservation of meaning, correct timing, creating natural-sounding feel for the final product, but it's such a strong choice to make when translating the original Japanese line, which is closer to, Noctis will soon be here to take you back. On the flip side, in the line after in Japanese, Arden refers to Ignis as Noctis's precious friend, a descriptor which is sort of absent in English. So is this just a case of moving an adjective indication of their closeness around, or does this add a new textual element to the script? I'm pretty strongly in favor that this phrase in particular reframes the majority of Ignis's actions, and that's the basic framework I've been working with this entire time. We can absolutely debate the semantics over whether or not Ignis is in love with Noctis in a romantic sense, but the salient point is that Ignis's love of Noctis, in whatever form it takes, is the driving force of his actions. And of course, the other really important line is Ignis's final one, I don't want to die without him. Those last two words are unique to the English version, and they frame Ignis's sacrifice in a very specific way. I'm going to be frank. That's not the way you speak about someone who is simply like your best bro or best friend in your dying breath. Now, for the sake of fairness and full context, the line in Japanese is merely "I don't want to die," while the German localization, which actually gets talked about a good deal in the 15 fandom for occasionally providing information and insight that other versions do not, simply goes with "I don't want to die alone." Regardless, it is a startlingly intimate death scene and absolutely lingers there and makes you want to do better, makes you want to make it right. So to unlock the alternate ending, you have to defeat Arden in combat, which is no small feat, and it will require at least one additional sacrifice time extension. The ring's power only lasts for so long, and Ignis must be willing to sacrifice further to extend it. You can only extend the timer slightly by choosing Risk My Life, which gives you more time at the base level, but you can only use this twice before you are forced to sacrifice. In fact, you are essentially required to finally select Sacrifice My Life, which puts the boss fight on a 4-minute timer, 4 being a number associated with death in Japanese culture. But it also grants Ignis an exceptional amount of strength, raising his damage multiplier to dizzying heights and easily breaking the 999 damage cap just multiple times over. And these sacrifice sequences make the player sit through the agony of the ring, just burning Ignis from the inside out, the scars and the flames growing more intense each time. Now, none of this is new for seeing the ring's power in action. It's the same thing we saw in Kingsglaive with Nyx Ulrich when he used the ring, and it can be hinted at every time Noctis uses the ring in-game, but Episode Ignis very much makes you have to be there with that suffering before it returns you to the boss fight. But eventually, Arden can be defeated, and we can finally unlock the alternate ending. This is another scene we're going to watch all the way through and then go back and analyze. Oh, there we go.
The best laid plans, eh? It may have eluded me for now, but rest assured, I shall have my revenge.
Ignis!
Ravis. He lent us a hand, if you can believe it.
What the hell were you thinking?
How could we let this happen?
How could I let this happen? This is all my fault.
No.
If I'm really some kind of savior, why can't I save the ones I love? I'm sorry. You guys have stayed with me this whole time, and all it's done is cost you pain. Not anymore. All that ends now. Please! Lend me your strength! Help me! Protect my friends!
listen well. A king cannot lead by standing still. A king pushes onward always, accepting the consequences and never looking back.
Okay. So there's so much to break down. I almost don't even know where to start here. Just everything that transpires between Ignis and Noctis in this scene is so poignant. Right from when Noctis first calls his name and how he rushes over and is immediately kneeling at Ignis' side, even the small things like Gladio's grief-stricken cry and Prompto's trembling question add so many layers to what's happening here as everyone comes to terms of how far Ignis is willing to go to save Noctis. How Ignis is willing both metaphorically and literally to set himself on fire to keep Noctis warm. I haven't really raised this question yet, but it kind of hangs very pointedly over the scene. Does Noctis feel the same about Ignis? God, it's such a hard question to answer because there's the very simple answer that, we know that they do, canonically, love each other. And the exact definition of that love is kind of ancillary, but I feel that the potential is there, of course. I think there's an argument to make for Noctis being queer, but that's a much more subtle argument than there is for Ignis. Ignis is about as subtle as his leopard print shirt, let's be honest, y'all. It's more the summation of lots of little things than any singular moment in Noctis' case. But when we're talking about those little things, if I was to make an argument for Noctis being queer, then I would have this scene as a crucial part of that argument. Everything from the tenderness that he holds Ignis' hand, using both hands like their special handshake, the gentle way he pulls Ignis in close, that little glance that he grants, and that he only passes Ignis to those he trusts, the plea he makes to the crystal to solve not some massive planet-wide problem, but to simply protect those he loves and to keep them safe. And that last look they share, this steadfast and determined. Noctis is really at his most regal when acting out of a deep personal love rather than a rigidly and unfairly ordained prophecy. It just really speaks to that possibility. And the ring passes from Ignis' hand to Noctis' without a single bit of pain on Noctis' part, and he willingly embraces the crystal's light so that way this duty can be fulfilled, and it's fulfilled willingly this time around. Oh hey, kind of going back to that idea that the mysterious voice is Luna, there's also this theory that the blue flickers in the crystal's magic and its ability to heal Ignis might also be her influence. It's just something kind of interesting to note here. And it just bookends once again with that, that same scene of their first meeting, and there's sort of this feeling that the look that they share when Noctis steps into the crystal is the maturation of the feeling born from that first fledgling touch. I can't discount that the feeling might be mutual. But I do feel, though, that Ignis would have done all of this without any particular thought towards whether or not Noctis reciprocates his feelings. Given everything we know about Ignis, it's very easy to see him as the type of person who's just happy as long as his beloved is happy. If Noctis is safe and alive, then that's enough for him. So, hey, this is the longest clip in the entire panel, and I'm going to talk over the music as the credits roll, and then we'll analyze the ending afterwards. The credits roll kind of goes by, with this, with the music bright and warm this time around, and it's swelling as it paints this very different picture about what happens during the 10 years that people spend awaiting Noctis' return. In this version of the story, Ignis retains his sight, and he trusts the visions that were granted to him. So he spends the next decade formulating a plan to save Noctis' life. And this shift in the timeline, too, means that there's more time to prepare before Eos is swallowed up into eternal night. And it's time spent making careful preparations with folks all across the world It's actually really heartwarming to see all the different NPCs, the different friends of the party all sort of pitch in and do their part to prepare for the coming night. And while the suffering is not completely erased, you can definitely tell that it's less in this version of things. And we see whole fates just completely, like, upended. Like, Ramus is alive, and Tenebrae is free from attack, so we know it's possible that some of the cruelty of the original timeline can be undone in this one. And finally, you know, at the end of this, we're going to see, you know, Noctis is going to arrive, and Ignis, Gladio, and Prompto are once again there, ready to meet him. But this time, they know exactly what they need to do. And they know exactly what it means to be able to save Noctis this time. So please enjoy the after credit scene. I'm going to do my best to wrap this up, and we might not have time for Q&A, and if so, I do apologize, but we're going to at least try to finish it all out.
It's been a long road, but at last we've arrived.
Yeah. Prompto. Gladio. Iggy.
For 10 years, everything we've done was in preparation for this day.
And today, we finish it.
Right.
Today, we walk tall together.
So yeah, this like has just such a different and more hopeful like version of the original. There's no leaving Noctis to die. There's no turning his backs on him so he can face his fate alone. Even his way of addressing them is different. It's impossible to miss how he turns to Iggy last, echoing back that other ending by way of that fond nickname. And in the end, we see the dawn rise again. And do you want to know exactly how they defeat Arden and bring back the dawn and everybody lives? Well, yeah, so do I. This plot point is never actually addressed in any other piece of FF15 canon. The alternate timeline, Dawn of the Future, follows a completely different path from this one that instead involves attacking and dethroning Bahamut. The FF15 official works only kind of answers the question in broad strokes. Time passes and the final battle in the Crown City arrives. Ignis has been devising a secret plan to destroy the immortal Arden and drive out the darkness. There is no meaning in a peace obtained by sacrificing Noctis. His emotion surpasses even the intent of the gods and brings forth another future. And in the end, the exact how matters less than the why. And the why is exactly what I've been saying this entire time. From the moment Ignis wore the ring in order to save Noctis' life, Ignis has pledged to return back the hands of fate, rearrange the stars themselves in order to save the one he loves, and he succeeds. Also, Ravis, I'm sorry what they did to you with that Colonel Sanders beard. This is why white-haired pretty boys don't usually get the chance to age. It usually just doesn't work out well. So we're gonna watch the final scene on its own because I have like stuff to talk about with it. I hope I'm able to at least finish up. This is literally like the last thing I'm going to talk about. Hopefully that's okay. Okay, thank you. I saw that Flygon gave me the thumbs up to keep going, so yay. Anyway, there's a few ways to analyze this very last scene of the DLC. We're going to be talking about the decision to leave the final line, like, unspoken. There's a few different lenses to view it through. The final scene of the main timeline, for example, shows Noctis and Luna together in the afterlife, and neither of them speak during that sequence, and the camera pointedly pulls back during the one kiss they share to give them this sort of modicum of privacy in the moment. So there's this concept here that Ignis's words to Noctis are pointedly not for us. That this is a similar type of intimate moment where we're only given partial privy, and whatever is said isn't meant for the audience, it's meant for Noctis alone. We already have these different touches of intimacy in the scene, even with their distance. That Ignis starts his salute as a glaive expected to give his king, but then Noct and Iggy exchange the same long and gentle nod, like when Noct entered the crystal, and suddenly there's this whole different warmth to the scene. And there's another, though more symbolic way to read this, that the full extent of Ignis's quiet feelings for Noctis remain unspoken. We've talked earlier about the concept with FF15 that parts of the narrative are defined by what remains unspoken, and I think this is, to borrow a very appropriate phrase, maybe a love that dare not speak its name. I mean, for a storyline that just drips with queer themes, there's something poetic to having the final line be something that the players have to work out for themselves. That there's this unspoken aspect right there before you, with just a touch of effort, you can figure it out on your own. Setting the symbolism aside, we can venture a decent guess as to what is literally said, since Ignis's lip animations are edited for different languages to make it possible to read his lips in each version. And our best guess is that in a callback to the final line he speaks to Noctis in the main game, he calls Noctis Your Majesty. That his humblest desire, and that's the name of the special version of the prologue that plays during the after credits sequence, has always been to see Noctis rule as king and to stand beside him as his advisor. That it's enough for have Noctis sit on the throne he was never meant to sit upon save to die, to have him see a dawn he was never meant to see, to have him in the rightful place he was never supposed to hold. That it's enough to have Noctis safe and whole and alive. From my time in the FF15 fandom, we do actually have our best guess as to how this line would sound if voiced during a stream where Ignis's English voice actor, Adam Crosdell, played episode Ignis. He was asked to share how he would have played the line if asked to voice it. As it turned out, he basically kind of nailed the timing of it to the point where it could be edited into the scene. So that's what I did. So I feel it's only right to kind of close out this section with the chance to experience the scene truly in full. And yes, I know that the audio quality on this is a bit wonky. It was the best I could do at the time with what we were given, and it's certainly more than we have otherwise.
Your Majesty.
Okay, unfortunately we are going to have to sort of drop the Q&A, but I'm just going to do my little outro. So this is my last little bit. So, also I want you all to know, I thought a lot about what image was going to be put here, and in the end, I felt it only right to use a photo taken from within my own copy of the game, generated by the game's photo AI, to have these two in their natural habit, as it were, for the end of this. Making sure I get the right music at the end. Yeah. Just in the making of episode Ignis, the team really wanted to have the opportunity to dig down into Ignis's character to shed a lot of the trappings he has as the serious tactician or the resident team mom, and instead showcase the deep hidden passionate side that he has. And that side really only comes out in relation to Noctis. Again and again, the canon just reinforces this concept that no one means as much to Ignis as Noctis does. So I don't think it's really that much of a stretch to interpret Ignis's clear and deep love for his prince, for his king, for his Noctis, as something beyond platonic. All the years of care, every act that he does, large and small, being willing to literally live and die at Noctis's feet. All the tropes that surround Ignis's devotion just drip with romanticism, and that Ignis protects and then saves Noctis by wearing his ring adds this whole extra dimension to it all. Everyone else wants the ring out of a lust for power, or they must wear it for the sake of duty. Ignis is the one person who wears the ring out of love and devotion first and foremost. And I feel that in verse 2, Noctis is the next person to wear that ring out of love and devotion, and that only happens when he takes it from Ignis's hand to his own. All of that is done as a rejection of the cruel fate that is put upon Noctis's head of a crown burdened under the weight of its own blood price. And y'all, queerness and queer love are just as much about rejection as they are about acceptance, about rejecting the mandates that are made without our consent, of rejecting the cruelness of a world and pushing it back with our love, our passion, our devotion, of rejecting fates that can seem almost insurmountable until we begin to question and combat them. And episode Ignis, at its heart, is about the rejection of fates, of prophecies, of every last god in heaven in the name of a love worth dying for, in the name of a love worth living for. And god damn if that's not queer. Unfortunately, we had to skip the Q&A, which I am sorry. I will be in chat, and you are also all welcome to DM me if you have any questions. And I'm just going to leave this on one last thought, y'all. There's no heterosexual explanation for Final Fantasy XV episode Ignis. Thank you all so much. It has been an absolutely wonderful panel. I'm going to bow out now, turn it over to Frozen Flagon, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of Fuzzy Logic.